The trust manager's silver pen clicked 3 times against his mahogany desk. Click, click, click. That tiny metallic rhythm was the exact sound of a young boy's entire future being incinerated. Sighs. A completely zeroed balance, Daniel Morrison murmured, his eyes refusing to meet mine as he slid the printed ledger across the pristine glass. My own daughter and her slick-talking husband hadn't just abandoned their terrified 10-year-old child in my care for 8 agonizing, beautiful years. They had crept into a California branch exactly 1 month ago, smiled at a teller, and liquidated his entire 6-figure college fund. Every single cent gone. How do you look at the child you raised and tell him his biological creators cannibalized his dreams to fund their delusions? I didn't scream. I didn't weep. Instead, a familiar, glacial stillness flooded my veins. The precise, bloodless calm I used to feel right before handing down a maximum sentence. They thought they were dealing with a tired, gullible grandfather. They completely forgot I commanded the Multnomah County Circuit Court bench for over 3 decades, and my gavel was suspended in the air, waiting to strike. My name is R. Coley. I am 68 years old, residing in Portland, Oregon for over 4 decades. During my 32 years presiding over complex legal battles, people labeled me as equitable but unyielding. What those attorneys never realized was that my profound patience wasn't forged in fluorescent-lit courtrooms. It was cultivated in the freezing darkness of my backyard observatory, staring through a telescope lens, waiting for celestial bodies to perfectly align. The cosmos operates on its own uncompromising schedule, and so does absolute retribution. Almost a decade ago, Danielle stood on my porch with Trent hovering behind her and their tiny son, Ethan, clutching his backpack like a shield. Her face wore a stretched, synthetic smile. She promised it was merely temporary assistance. 6 months, perhaps 12. Trent supposedly had a massive commercial development brewing down in San Francisco, requiring relentless focus. A stable environment was what Ethan needed, she insisted. When I looked down at my grandson, he wouldn't even lift his gaze. My chest seized. Of course, I took him in. Family protects family. But does family betray family with such casual cruelty? Danielle was once a brilliant light. I still vividly recall her at age 7, sprinting to the window to watch my car pull into the driveway, wrapping her fragile arms around my waist to babble about her day. She eventually conquered law school at Portland State University. I envisioned her dominating a courtroom. Instead, she collided with Trent McVeigh. Even uttering his name turns my stomach. A 41-year-old perpetual hustler chasing phantom real estate deals armed with cocktail party charisma that dissolves under any real investigation. When they began courting, I utilized my judicial connections to pull his background. No felonies, but a graveyard of defaulted loans and shattered business ventures. When I voiced my concerns, she branded me a controlling tyrant. 6 months of radio silence followed, ending only when they announced their rushed marriage. The afternoon they surrendered Ethan to my care, they performed a masterful theatrical display of parental responsibility. Danielle produced a thick manila folder. They had established a robust educational trust, she declared, exactly $180,000 sitting safely in a Wells Fargo account, earmarked solely for his university tuition. I was supposedly listed as a secondary trustee. Trent clamped a heavy hand on her shoulder, flashing his practiced, hollow grin, assuring me they were securing the boy's horizon. For 8 relentless years, I financed that boy's existence on a modest government pension. 8 years of navigating agonizing teacher meetings, expensive orthodontic hardware, outgrown sneakers, and midnight algebra crises. I guided him through bicycle crashes and teenage heartbreak. We sat in my frozen observatory, mapping distant galaxies while his parents remained ghosts. Exactly 3 visits in nearly a decade. 3 fleeting appearances armed with flashy plastic toys and hollow vows about next month. How long does it take for a child's hope to bleed out completely? By year 2, Ethan stopped uttering the words mom and dad. He started calling them by their first names. Yet he evolved into an extraordinary young man, finding his ultimate refuge in the exact place I did, gazing upward. His grasp of astrophysics surpassed college seniors. Last spring, he burst through my front door, frantically waving a formal acceptance letter from Oregon State University, admitted to their elite astrophysics track, complete with a partial $12,000 scholarship. We devoured homemade lasagna that evening, celebrating until the sun breached the horizon, mapping out the discoveries he was destined to make. But Oregon State demands $32,000 annually, excluding housing and academic materials. The scholarship barely dented the reality. I had already incinerated my life savings supporting him. Roughly $39,000 every single year for groceries, medical premiums, clothing, and extracurriculars. My emergency reserves were utterly decimated, but I never panicked. Why would I? That massive six-figure safety net was waiting safely in a vault. Or so I believed. 2 weeks ago, sitting in that sterile bank office, Daniel Morrison's words physically derailed my reality. My status as a co-trustee was never legally formalized. They retained supreme authority. They had drained the account and vanished. Betrayal always wears the face of family. I requested the printed transaction history, thanked the manager with a chillingly steady voice, and walked out into the blinding June sunlight. My mind raced through the horrific implications. Signatures from both parents were required in person. They had plotted this heist together, stood shoulder to shoulder at a teller's window, and gleefully executed their own child's future. Pulling into my driveway, I sat paralyzed behind the steering wheel for 10 silent minutes. Through the living room glass, I spotted Ethan diligently attacking his summer reading. He flashed me an innocent, trusting wave. He possessed zero knowledge that the foundation of his existence had just been shattered. Right then, a terrifying metamorphosis occurred inside my soul. The accommodating, unconditionally loving patriarch died instantly in the driver's seat of my sedan. The entity that unbuckled the seatbelt and marched toward the front door was an apex legal predator. Patience is just a weapon disguised as waiting. I had spent my entire adult life dissecting statutory law, and I knew precisely how to deploy it as a weapon. That midnight, bathed in the red tactical light of my observatory, I scrutinized the banking documents. The withdrawal happened on May 15th. Exactly when I was agonizing over Ethan's final exams and organizing his graduation celebration, his creators were pillaging his lifeline. Memories began violently surfacing. Danielle's second visit, 6 years prior. She lingered for a pathetic 4 hours, entirely consumed by her vibrating smartphone, barely sparing 30 seconds to acknowledge a solar system model Ethan spent an entire quarter constructing. I watched him quietly pack his shattered expectations into a mental box that day. I hauled out my personal financial ledgers, every preserved receipt, every credit card statement, every tax document spanning nearly a decade. 11 grand for orthodontics, nearly 3,000 for summer basketball conditioning, saxophone rentals, emergency room copays, the used sedan I purchased for his 17th birthday so he could commute to his library gig. My $68,000 annual county pension was stretched to its absolute breaking point. My once healthy $94,000 savings account was bleeding out at barely 12 grand. I had unknowingly funded their freedom. At 3 in the morning, while Orion dominated the sky, I dialed a fiercely guarded number. Philip Hart, a discreet private investigator who operated in the shadows. He answered with gravelly alertness. I demanded extreme discretion and ordered him to trace the stolen $180,000. He hesitated, warning me about the emotional collateral of hunting my own kin. I had never felt a deeper, more violent certainty in my entire existence. 6 days later, Philip dropped a massive, heavily documented folder onto my coffee table. Ethan was safely at work. What Philip revealed was a masterclass in depravity. They obliterated $47,000 in toxic credit card debt. They erased $32,000 in delinquent student loans. They dropped $78,000 in liquid cash on a pristine silver Mercedes GLE. The remaining $45,000 fueled a luxury kitchen renovation in their Mission District apartment. Philip slid a glossy surveillance photo across the wood. Trent gripping the steering wheel of the German machine, wearing expensive sunglasses and a suffocating aura of unearned arrogance. He was weaponizing his son's stolen tuition to project a facade of wealth, desperately hunting investors for a phantom Oakland development project. They bought their fake prestige with Ethan's blood. Before we dive into the trap I meticulously constructed for them, if you find yourself hooked by tales of calculated justice against toxic relatives, take a moment to subscribe and join our community, because what happens next is a masterclass in psychological warfare. I summoned Percy Washington, a cutthroat family law attorney possessing 4 decades of ruthless courtroom experience. Sitting in his downtown office, I unleashed the entire 8-year timeline. He listened intently, furiously scribbling on a yellow pad. When I demanded justice, he warned me family court was designed for child welfare, not vengeance. Ethan was technically an adult now, but I wasn't seeking custody. I was hunting for devastating financial restitution. Under state statutes, guardians assuming biological duties can ruthlessly pursue compensation if the creators deliberately abandon their post. Percy warned the Education Trust was legally their property. I countered with the doctrine of promissory estoppel. They weaponized a written financial promise to manipulate me into assuming their legal burdens. Percy's eyes gleamed with predatory realization. If we proved a systematic pattern of deception, we could obliterate them. 8 years, 3 visits, 0 financial support. We calculated the damages. 8 years of my life, valued at roughly $39,000 annually, equaled $312,000. Add the fraudulent $180,000 trust. The total payload was a staggering $492,000. Percy warned they would furiously litigate, claiming my guardianship was entirely voluntary. Let them bleed themselves dry arguing, I stated coldly. I possess 8 bankers' boxes of ironclad documentation. They possess pathetic excuses. Returning to my observatory, I didn't search the stars for comfort. I utilized them to calculate the exact trajectory of my strike. They mistakenly believed my kindness was a terminal weakness. They were about to discover you never steal from a man who spent his life studying the architecture of punishment. I ordered Percy to prepare the legal missiles. The subsequent fortnight was a horrifying study in human greed. While Percy's paralegal digitized my mountain of receipts, a terrifying realization emerged from my safe. The original custody paperwork was a temporary 6-month agreement requiring mandatory judicial reviews. They abandoned every single hearing. By statutory default, my status had quietly transformed into permanent legal custody 7 years ago. I possess the exact same lethal legal standing as any abandoned parent seeking retroactive child support. While drowning in orthodontic bills, my mobile device vibrated, a San Francisco area code. Danielle's voice was sickeningly melodic, acting as if she hadn't been a ghost for nearly a decade. They had incredible news, she chirped. Financial stability had miraculously arrived. They finally wanted to be a family again. They were demanding Ethan relocate to California. Why the sudden maternal urge? The math was horrifyingly simple. They burned the tuition capital and now they needed a new funding source. Then came the true dagger. She casually suggested I didn't need my massive, paid-off 4-bedroom house anymore. She urged me to liquidate my real estate equity, utilizing Trent's expert connections to maximize profit. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. They wanted my sanctuary. They viewed Ethan not as a son, but as emotional leverage to forcibly extract my remaining wealth. I maintained a voice of terrifying neutrality and accepted their proposal to visit the following week. They believed they were marching into a gold mine. They were actually stepping onto a perfectly concealed landmine. I secured the absolute worst nightmare for their impending trial. Judge Glenda Morris, a notoriously savage magistrate who despised manipulative litigants. I warned Ethan they were arriving, watching his face fracture with desperate, exhausting hope. I concealed the legal documents, locked the 8 boxes of financial ammunition in my study, and waited. Thursday arrived beneath an ominous canopy of gray clouds. The silver Mercedes, purchased with Ethan's astrophysics degree, purred into my driveway. Trent emerged, sporting an expanded waistline and the aggressive swagger of a man living a lie. Danielle's eyes didn't seek her son. They immediately scanned my roofline, assessing the property value. The ensuing dinner was a grotesque exhibition of narcissism. They choked down my roasted chicken while endlessly broadcasting their renovated Italian marble countertops. When Ethan proudly announced his Oregon State acceptance, Trent actually laughed. "Astrophysics? What are you going to do with that, Teach?" he mocked, offering instead a pathetic internship in commercial real estate. I watched Ethan retreat into a defensive shell, barricading his heart against their toxic radiation. That night, Danielle cornered me in the kitchen, aggressively measuring my cabinetry, calculating the theoretical resale value if I modernized the appliances. They were mentally spending my death benefits. I retreated to my study, locked the door, and authorized Percy to unleash hell. The lawsuit was officially filed. The countdown had commenced. Friday morning, the trap snapped shut. Trent cornered me over coffee, unveiling his glorious Oakland investment pitch. He needed a $250,000 capital injection. He explicitly demanded I sell my home, hand him the liquid equity, and allow him to manage my future. He promised a massive return that would allegedly fund Ethan's education. That evening, fueled by my premium whiskey, Trent lost his remaining discipline. Slurring his words, he verbally assaulted my intelligence, demanding I surrender control, sell the property, and stop behaving like an arrogant judge. Danielle attempted to pacify him, but the beast was loose. He aggressively estimated my home's value at $600,000, calling my independence wasteful. I set my book down with agonizing slowness. I asked him if liquidating my house to secure his $250,000 position was smart business. He grinned, assuming he had conquered me. "Tell me, Trent." My voice dropped an octave, radiating lethal intent. "When you and your wife walked into that bank last month and stole $180,000 from your own child's educational trust, was that smart business too?" The oxygen vanished from the room. The whiskey glass froze inches from his mouth. Danielle's complexion transformed to chalk. Trent stammered violently, attempting to claim the funds were joint property utilized to extinguish debts. Danielle shrieked that I had been spying on them. I rose to my feet, summoning every ounce of judicial terror I possessed. I informed them I had bankrolled their child's existence for 8 years, while they financed luxury vehicles with stolen potential. When Trent aggressively lunged forward, I leveled a stare that froze him in his tracks. I systematically dismantled their illusions, revealing my absolute knowledge of their missed custody hearings, my permanent legal status, and my ironclad right to sue for retroactive restitution. "You thought you could waltz in here and strip the copper wire from my walls," I whispered. "You have until sunrise to vacate my property. From this second forward, you only communicate through my counsel. You are about to discover what actual fraud looks like." I locked myself in my study, listening to their muffled, panicked screams echoing through the hallways. The following morning, the stolen German machine fled my driveway. Ethan wandered downstairs, quietly asking what happens next. "Now," I told him, "we make sure actions have consequences." 2 days later, the process server struck. Danielle's hysterical phone call was a symphony of terror. $500,000? You're suing us for $500,000? I calmly recited the arithmetic. 8 years of survival math plus their calculated heist. Trent grabbed the receiver, threatening to hire ruthless defense attorneys. I reminded him he was utterly bankrupt, funding his life on fumes and stolen credit. They mortgaged their soul to hire Marcus Brooks, a vicious litigator known for scorched earth tactics. They filed an absurd countersuit demanding custody and alleging emotional distress. But in Judge Glenda Morris's courtroom, theater dies instantly. During the preliminary hearing, Morris demanded paper trails. She ordered Brooks to produce the alleged loan documents proving the trust withdrawal was temporary. She demanded business ledgers justifying the luxury vehicle. She requested phone logs proving they maintained a parental bond. Brooks sweated through his expensive suit, admitting they possessed absolutely nothing. Morris slammed her gavel, giving them exactly 72 hours to manifest the non-existent evidence, or she would legally assume they were perjuring themselves. The trial was a systematic slaughter. My attorney Percy dismantled their character piece by piece. Philip Hart exposed the financial rot. Ethan's educators testified to my solitary presence at every vital milestone. When Danielle finally took the stand, sobbing hysterically about needing more time to fix things, Percy asked her a single, devastating question. If you were deeply committed to replacing the college fund, why did you authorize a $78,000 luxury vehicle purchase instead of saving a single dime? The silence that followed was the sound of their absolute destruction. Judge Morris's 19-page ruling was a masterpiece of judicial execution. She eviscerated their credibility. The verdict was total victory, $492,000 awarded to me, payable within 18 months. The first $75,000 installment was demanded in 30 days. The educational trust was to be forcefully reconstituted with me as the sole, unchallengeable dictator of the funds. Furthermore, they were slapped with my $23,400 legal fees. Morris concluded by condemning their behavior as selfishness difficult to comprehend. They were forced to liquidate the Mercedes. They sold their newly renovated apartment. Every single asset they purchased with my grandson's stolen future was bled dry to settle the judgment. I severed all communication forever. Months later, beneath a razor-clear winter sky, I handed Ethan a sealed envelope inside our observatory. It was the fully funded, irrevocable tuition confirmation for his freshman year at Oregon State. He stared at the document, his eyes shining in the red light. He calibrated the massive telescope lens, locking onto Jupiter's rings. He asked me what I had learned about justice. I told him it requires the same terrifying patience as tracking a dying star. You have to wait for the universe to perfectly align. Somewhere in the suffocating fog of San Francisco, two miserable people were drowning in the consequences of their own toxic greed. But inside that frozen observatory, watching my grandson map the heavens, I knew absolute balance had been restored. The universe kept turning, and the bill had finally been paid in full. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel and listen to a few stories there. You can find the link to it in the collaboration or description of this video or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us because this channel may soon cease to exist.